Our planet is a lonely speck in the great cosmic dark.
We're on a rock hurling through the universe. Planet as an organic spaceship.
Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand.
Hi, this is Chrissy.
And I'm Marie.
And you're listening to Alt.Pop.Repeat,
A show where we get into the nitty-gritty around counterculture, alternative culture, and sync it up with what?
with pop culture.
Yeah, man. That's what we do.
There we go.
High five.
Yes.
We're back. And we were lucky enough with this episode to talk to Biff Naked about punk culture and where we see it in mainstream culture today.
And we went into this and she shared so openly about her life. We're like, hey, we want to talk about punk music. And through this, she shared about how her life is definitely punk.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. From starting off during the punk revolution, during that time, or pop punk revolution, I would call it at that moment. Gwen Stefani, Courtney Love, she was one of those people that was part of that whole catalyst.
Yeah.
And then, had her entire career and then went through getting sick and having breast cancer and then fighting through that and now becoming a champion on that side and being an advocate for other people, which is amazing, that are dealing with cancer and cancer survivors. So she's 100% punk in that way, for sure. Going through stuff like that and coming out the other end with a positive attitude towards it and then going to help other people, well done, Biff.
She's had a lot of experiences in her life. And she somehow takes this. It's like, oh, this is just all these special ingredients. I'm just going to gather them all together and I'm going to cook up this brew. And now I'm going to share it with everybody. And it's going to make everybody's lives better. Even the words in her songs are so fantastic. When I was little, I'm singing them because they're so catchy.
Yeah, they are.
It's the same with Gwen Stefani, singing.
Yeah, I'm a huge Gwen Stefani
I'm just
fan.
a girl in the world. Take this pink ribbon off my eyes. Same thing happens with Biff. And you're like, just a moment of weakness.
Yeah.
I never meant where I said just a moment. Okay, look, if you're listening to this and you don't know Biff, you have to go obviously listen to the podcast first. But then after the podcast is over, you have to go to YouTube and you have to Google Biff Naked and you have to listen Moment of Weakness. You definitely have to listen Spaceman.
Yes.
Those two are by far two of the most transformative songs that I didn't realize were transformative until I was older.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, dude.
Well, she has a lot of meaning. And now she came out with a new single called Jim. I found this amazing clip from Much Music Days. Retro throwback right now. I do. Well, we're going to listen to it. And we'll insert it right now.
We need to insert right here the rewind sign.
Biff is the nickname for Beth that I had since grade 10. And Biff Naked was my punk rock stage name when I was in my first band. Because all these guys had cool names, right? Like DOA, the singer's name was Joey Shithead. And S-Nephew, the singer's name was Chai Pig. They all had these really cool names. So I was Biff Naked.
How did you start, Biff? How did punk become part of your life?
Tell us your story.
You've had a lot, and then coming out with Jim now. Maybe the beginning of where punk became that influence for you.
Well, I never wanted to be a singer, not ever, not once in my life, not even today. It was really an accident. I somehow managed to make it to university, which is seemingly in history. Now I look at it and go, I don't know how I did it. I was a runaway. It was just so much misadventure. I don't know how I wound up graduating and getting into university, but I did. And I dropped out in my first year because I met a guy with a mohawk who was a drummer in a band, and their singer quit. And of course, me wanting to impress, he's like, can you sing in our band for the show? Of course I can. Never sang in my life, except I think I was in Little Abner in grade 12. Cast as Daisy May. I was never in choir. I was never in choral. I was always a drama kid. And how hard can it be? I'm in theater. So I was like, how hard could it be? But I found a vehicle for my silly poetry writing that I'd always done in songwriting and in lyrics. And I was the type of person, I suppose, who was I was always a gym rat, again, dating fighters or bodybuilders, going to skateboard shows, doing our own skateboarding. So there's that tomboy element that
Yeah.
I feel benefited me as being a female performer on the road. A lot of these early gigs that we did and early tours, I mean, I was 19, 20 years old. Um, they were like terrible camping. It's terrible camping. I don't even know another way to describe it. And at the time, I was like, I wasn't a vegan yet. I still drank alcohol. And a lot of times we would get paid in beer. And you really have to roll with the punches. Flexible. We had our gear stolen. We got in fights with skinheads. I mean, there
Wow.
was just so much stuff that was like now, and I don't know if this is the same for you guys, but when I look back and recall things or reflect on different stories, even the traumatic stories in my life, I look back at my life always with fondness and always with good feelings. Even, I can remember being between like Montreal and Ottawa in winter, 1990, in a van and having a fight with my drummer husband and like stopping in a gas station, slamming the door and like running through a field, just like booking it through a field in the middle of nowhere.
Wow.
And it's so dramatic, right? Because we're such
It's
drama
amazing
queens
though.
when
No,
we're
I love it.
19.
Yeah.
And I laugh now and he laughs because we're still friends. And I'm just like, and that was a very traumatic, terrible experience. We were having a terrible fight where, I mean, I would have just to make a point, would have impaled myself on a fence, like anything. And now I look back and like, ah, so silly, but it was like serious drama. And it's just fun to remember all those early days. I didn't get in a tour bus for 10 years of touring. So, I mean, in Canada alone, it was probably 4 or 5 national tours every single year. I probably played minimum of 200, 250 shows a year,
Wow.
every year for 18 years.
Wow.
And making records and stuff like that. I hate the studio to this day. I hate studios. I like performing because I'm a theater kid and studios are hard. And when I was really young, I mean, there was no like computerized shit. So there was no auto tune. You had to like do 100 takes. You had to do 50 takes of a line. You had to do it until you got it right. And it was never easy. And it was always stressful because you want to do a good job. So I think that I carry that anxiety regarding recording always with me, although it's less now, just because with age comes kind of you relax into yourself regardless of what your job is. Um, but yeah, I can't complain. I feel bad for girls today who are breaking into the music business because I wish that everyone could have those experiences that I did, which really you cut your teeth learning how to tour in a van with dudes in Canada in
Yeah.
winter. Like you really
Yeah.
cut your teeth doing that. And you develop a skill set that I think there isn't a lot of opportunity to develop that today. We were
Yep.
happy to starve. We were happy to share a hamburger 4 ways so that we had enough gas money to get to the next gig. Like somehow, this is a serendipitous memory for me. And people today mostly are actually unwilling to do it. They're just unwilling to suffer in any way, shape, or form for their art. And I
Yeah.
think that's cool, because there's a safety factor to it. I mean, we've been in vans that have rolled. We used to sleep on the floor of the vehicle, no seatbelts. We used to sleep on the band gear. We had in my second band, we would be playing shows in San Francisco and LA, and his job was to meet a girl at the bar so that we could all stay at her house. Like
That's
that was
amazing.
that was his job.
So I
And
love that he must have been very good at this job for him to
He
have been
was.
nominated.
He was
Did he
so- he
was
was
he
6'5".
nominated or did he volunteer himself for the
No,
task?
he was very much into volunteering. But I mean, and these to us at the time, we're all in our early 20s. This was very logical. It was absolutely very logical. And for
It was cost
me as a
efficient at that
girl,
point. It was good on the
it
budget.
was exactly well, and we had no choice. Really, it's survival skills.
Yeah.
Um, for me as a female in the same situation, I always knew that I had a rule as a girl. I wasn't taken seriously anyway. So I already knew that going in. And that's nothing I ever took personally. I just knew that I couldn't be drunk. I couldn't get drunk. I couldn't be drinking. I couldn't act out of turn, or I was going to be hypersexualized no matter what I did, just because most of those mosh pit audiences aren't used to seeing a girl, at least in the early 90s, except strippers. So that's their only experience with a female on the stage. So they're going to have the same type of reaction. And again, it's something I had to know in my mind, not to take personally. I feel young people today take everything personally. And there's lots of stories of young women who will absolutely stop their show and say, someone yells, "Show us your tits." And so, me and the old school generation of OG punks
Yeah.
we roll our eyes at these young girls. I'm sorry, we just do.
Yeah.
Because for us, there was no choice. The show has to go on. How am I considered a peer with all these tough guy bands if I act like I'm just so precious and offended all the time? So there was that deliberation. And for me, that's why I just had to not drink any alcohol, absolutely at all.
Wow.
Because A, I never wanted to be misinterpreted. B, I would lose my voice because I would talk too much or laugh too loud because I had a beer. And C, it was just, I knew that I had to really control all my behavior to really make sure that I was absolutely communicating what I wanted to communicate. So to become a straight edge at like 24, for me, that was the only route I felt I could take to ensure that everyone absolutely understood what I was about, what I stood for, what my ethics were. And because at the time I was fighting to be accepted
Yeah.
in a different genre of music. And then it was a different era. We didn't have computers or cell phones. There was no internet. And so it was just different. And I feel like that was a great upbringing for me. Even though it was hard, it was also very nurturing because, all these dudes, these stinky, sweaty dudes, would not disrespect me in any way, no matter what I did. And that was something that I took a lot of pride in, and that poured over into the shows.
And this DIY, now we look at Spotify and all these Tidal and all these platforms. Punk before we looked at is, if you worked with a corporate company or any corporate identity, you were a sellout.
Right.
That's not, punk doesn't
Before, that
sell
was
out.
definitely
But
the
now
way,
we
yeah.
have all these streaming services that let you do DIY stuff that are owned by corporate companies. So
Mhm.
in its own way, that's the new punk, I guess I would say, in the streaming platform, but it's still
Oh, for
controlled by
sure.
an identity. So
Yeah.
there are ways for sure, I think, that artists, for example, women too, or that are stuck in bad situations, working with labels or people that are probably not supportive in them in any way, they can look at these other platforms and other people to work with and find their own communities and do a DIY kind of punk lifestyle that way, where they can build it out. Where before
Yes.
you were always stuck just working with the label and then a shitty manager. Now you don't have
Yes.
to work with the shitty manager. You can find your
Yeah.
good manager. You can put your stuff out, and then a label will come to you. Like that's punk,
Yes.
and that's the way people can play the game now. And
I don't know if
thankfully,
it's
but the
punk. I think
irony, but
punk is
well,
dead.
the irony,
But that's
well,
personally speaking, I think.
no,
it's
but
dead.
but the irony of the idea of the DIY is still there. The irony of it all is that the corporate built those structures for people to use to create DIY culture and
But wouldn't
DIY
that mean
music
that
and stuff
if
like
corporate
that.
is taking on DIY, then that undercurrent of anti-establishment no longer exists because
That's
that's
correct.
a corporate entity.
Right, exactly. But you're giving people a platform
Yes.
to create create more punk culture out of it, right?
Yes.
And create more DIY. So I agree, like punk could be dead in certain ways for sure, but can it have a resurgence? Like I guess this is the
Yeah.
complication with punk, because we look at like punk music and emo and ska and all these other things
Yeah.
where people are saying, even journalists say, punk is dead or punk isn't dead. And it's punk, pop music is still punk music. And then other people will say, no, it's not. So this is
Right.
where we're like, punk is so ingrained in our culture today. It's crazy. It's just, how do we define it?
Well,
I
we
guess.
play in these nice little boxes. So as we get
Yeah.
these channels for like Spotify,
Mm-hmm.
Tidal, TikTok,
Yes.
they have a terms of conditions of which we need to sign on the dotted line in order to say we are going to play within your rules, whatever
That's
those
right.
rules you set are.
Yeah.
And
That's
if
right.
we do that, we'll be the good ones. We'll be treated fairly, and maybe we'll have an audience, and maybe we'll be able to sell advertising and have endorsed brands and make income off of it, and then live this life that we've always dreamed of. So it's kind of like we're still playing in this little box. Whereas in my head, when I'm thinking of punk, I'm thinking anti-establishment. I'm thinking going
Right.
against the grain. I'm thinking about people who are just like, F you and F your rules and let me do this. And I think the biggest punk movement when it comes to digital is through torrents. That's saying, okay, look, I'm not paying for your content. I'm going to produce whatever I want. And only a
Mm-hmm.
limited amount of people are going to be able to get this, but they have to know how to use the technology. Or there's something called
See,
the
that's the challenge though.
Tor or
Yes.
the onion
Big
router.
challenge.
Yeah, but that's the challenge though, is, getting your punk establishment and your punk group to be tech savvy punks. Like
Yes.
that's its own channel of tech savvy
Cyberpunks,
punks.
man.
Well, yeah, but that's cyberpunks. But I agree with you. I think that 100% that's more punk than going using Spotify. But over time, though, for example, we look at Warp Tour. Warp Tour was punk, and Sum 41
Yes.
and all these amazing bands were on it. But it was the first festival to ever really jump off and make punk more mainstream into pop culture. So and everyone said they were selling out. But do we look at Sum 41 as punk? Like I guess we should ask you,
I
Beth,
thought
because
they were
like, you're the punk queen on this. Like what's punk in your mind? Like, do you look
Well,
at
I
Sum
mean,
41 and them as punk?
sure I do, in their original form. And I
Yeah.
mean, that's like a lot of bands. You can look at Sugar Ray, for example,
Yeah.
and, Mean Machine and songs like that from the early days were kind of punk, even though eventually they, as an Atlantic band, they became more mainstream. But same with Chili Peppers, they
Yeah.
became more mainstream. Nirvana was the same way, like all of these bands. And now in the metal scene, now metal is very punk, and death metal and all these genres of music are, I mean, it's so interesting how everything is accessible now, whereas before it was special in a way because it was so unique and a bit obscure, a little bit underground, a little mysterious and dangerous. And now everything is on the table, absolutely everything. And so part of that, yeah, it's are they on Spotify? Yeah, they're still on Spotify. Yeah, they still probably do it themselves. But like those corporate entities that provide platforms, the same is true for is it Etsy?
Mhm. Yeah.
So Etsy is a perfect example of all these girls, that were like, sewing T-shirts and making buttons that said, body positive things. And
Yeah.
they were like weirdo, nerdy, alternative girls that utilize these platforms. And then that goes along and along over these years to evolve to something that, even though it started in DIY culture, now it's like absolutely mainstream, which kind of opened the whole world up into things like body positivity and this kind of third wave feminism, and just like, the world is a really vast place, but it's even bigger online, where you can find like-minded people, and you can find your mutuality and your acceptance no matter what kind of art form you're making. And anybody can call themselves punk, even though we can sit here and go, well, when I think of punk, I think of hardcore. I think of hardcore. I don't even think what my early bands were doing was punk in any way. It was skateboarding music, or it was but hardcore is punk. Like, to me, those guys that are originally had tattoos, like jail tattoos, we call them,
Right.
all over themselves. And, just a bunch of shirtless guys in a mosh pit, to me, is punk. Whereas today, you can look at bands who are taking, a nod from punk roots and fusing their music with it. Is it still punk? Depends on the generation you're asking.
Oh my gosh. So where do we start now with punk? There's so many places and so many things and so many references in today's culture, mainstream pop culture that we have that reference punk. It's embedded in there.
Dude, it's like, I mean, we've talked about this so many times because this is probably for us like the most controversial topic that we've ever handled interpersonally between us.
Yeah.
Because I look at punk as being musically, punk is dead. But I think the philosophy of punk is very much alive. It just doesn't necessarily manifest in the way that when you think of punk music, when you think of punk, we'll say quote unquote punk, I'm doing air quotes. When you think of punk, you think specifically of music. And it takes you back to a time. And, I think automatically I go, Sex Pistols.
Yep.
I'm thinking Sid Vicious.
Yep.
I'm thinking Blondie, the Ramones, CBGBs.
Yep.
In New York City. That's what I'm drawn to. That's what I think of. Why those movements happened are very different than what they were born out of a time where that form of music was the ultimate rebellion. I think nowadays our rebellion lies in very different spaces. I think it lies more in the internet.
Right. And I would say as well that punk culture in general started as counterculture, and now I think it's more subculture. So a lot of people now classify punk as subculture because it's so ingrained within everything we do. So in counterculture, it started to push, and that's what counterculture is. It's pushing different ideals from the average norm that people have in society and pushing new ideas onto mainstream pop culture, into the main populace. So a lot of people were anarchists and they were fighting for different types of rights and saying, fighting from like the bohemian movement and from the 70s, like disco era and stuff like that. They were fighting for something else. And then now, and it was through music, it was through literature, it was through fashion, it was through all these different outlets. And then the mainstream picked up on it. And then it started to become this subculture. So now what I think we're seeing is a subculture, a punk everywhere we go. I think in music, well, obviously we don't really have punk music anymore. But in the early, 2000s, we had that was the liftoff of punk music. That was the time where pop punk music had its liftoff. And everybody was consuming that from Sum 41, Green Day, and some people wouldn't call them punk, but I think they're still
it was
punk.
a style of music.
Totally, yeah.
Right?
And I think that a lot of them gave credit to people that started the punk revolution. And a lot of punk artists would say that they're not punk because they did the sellout and corporate was helping to push them.
Yeah, but also at the same time, like you had kids that were on their skateboards and the true skateboarders, and then there was the posers, and you didn't want to be a poser, but who defines that? You can define whatever it is that you want to be. This comes down to a sense of individuality. You can declare yourself whatever it is that you want to be, skateboard, whatever. If you want to skateboard and you want to wear a fancy pair of shoes, your little Nikes, and not wear your Vans, you're still punk. Yes. You're still doing it. If that's your thing, you do it. But there's always going to be groups of people that are going to judge people for it. That's what I thought was interesting about like No Doubt, ska, again, like Nirvana.
But she really lifted off. Gwen Stefani and Biff Naked and all of them really lifted off during that pop punk time.
100%.
Yeah.
But we as kids during that time were like, we were being fed the stories from Gen X. So we had like these stories of this really, despondent population. There were like these kids and they were like, I'm going to university and I'm doing my degrees, but I can't get a job and my life is terrible. And my families have lost everything because we're going through the recession because of the .com bust. And so there was a lot of struggle that was happening around the world at that time. So as we're seeing like Nirvana and Soundgarden and all of these grunge bands, Sonic Youth. I could go on. I can just like naming the bands. Sublime, No Effects. They started to come up during this time and the kids were angry. So they aligned with it and they're like, look, I don't need to subscribe to your rules. I don't need to be like a hair metal fan because like hair metal was like a big thing that grunge overtook it, which was very punk. And we're like, we want to have identity. So we're going to wear our plaid shirts tied around our waist. We're going to start wearing those Doc Martens again. We're going to wear baggy jeans and cargo pants. And as a woman, I'm not going to wash my hair for days. I'm not going to wear makeup. My makeup's going to look smeared on my face like I've just slept in a heroin den for 4 days.
God, it's a horrible look.
Yeah, but I mean, that was the time.
Look.
We lived hard and we lived
I didn't do
fast.
that look. I didn't do that. Well, mind you, I was in high school or public school in high school when that was coming out.
Yeah.
I was wearing a lot of plaid.
Oh, dude, like go back even
Lots
further.
of Doc Martens and things like that.
This is like, I remember junior high and it was such a big deal. And all the girls were like baggy. And I remember my mom was saying, well, at least she's not showing off her body. Like she didn't worry about it because it was all baggy pants and like that was the look. But that was a total rebellion.
Yeah.
And that I think is punk. So anybody who's saying that the music of the time wasn't punk, I'm like, yeah, cool. They were making money off of it. Yeah, they were selling out, sure. But they were saying some real shit in their songs. And they were like, you know what? You can't control me.
I should start off saying I think the evolution of punk went from 70s to more hardcore, DIY, underground, and then we started seeing it move into a subculture in the 80s, and then we really started seeing it go hardcore mainstream in the 90s.
Yeah.
And now I think it's kind of still had a little bit of a resurgence as well too, though, when you look at, like Doc Martens are in fashion now and people are wearing them and doing little odes to punk. Well, right. And people are wearing punk things, not knowing that they're wearing punk elements. When I rock my Doc Martens, a friend of mine, a director ended up saying to me, he's like, you're a little anarchist, aren't you, Chrissy? Like, look at you and your little punk.
I'm so cute.
Right, exactly.
It's definitely not rebellious now. Green hair is the norm. Tattoos are the norm. Spike bracelets, piercings. It's like, you're not scaring your mom. Your mom takes you to get it.
But I do have that ode to it. It's a nod to it. I understand that I'm doing
government.
it. Right. Let's go. And so I, oh gosh, I'm going to put on my lipstick and go overthrow the government.
You want to do it now. You want to go down the path.
I am a little bit of an anarchist.
You
I know
are.
that. Yeah. But that's my punk coming out in my fashion to show my sense of self.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of that we're seeing in little punk culture references that are becoming more mainstream fashion, which I love.
I think I think there's something really cute when people can buy baby onesies and it's the Ramones.
Like every creative movement, it starts with an underground base and it attracts people that are like-minded, and if it has enough depth to it, then it becomes co-opted by the main culture.
And you can find like the art of Black Flag, like the logo for Black Flag is a really cool logo, very artistic. You can buy that as art and throw it up in your wall. The meaning behind the work is lost for vast members of the general public, but the aesthetic and I think like that inherent rebellion that's within the fashion is still very much attractive to people because we had this huge amount of freedom that was given to us with the internet, right?
Yeah.
Hey, you can access anything, you can talk to anybody, you can have your opinion, you can share whatever you want, but there's still so many levels of control. Those terms and conditions, so long, you have to read it. There's rules for every platform you're applying to. You're assigning away a bit of your freedom to these platforms. So we're starting to create these boxes in which we have to live in. And so I think there's going to be another resurgence. So we had the punk movement, the first one, And like we can get into the history of it a little bit later. You know, we had the punk movement where it was, and I think of it typically in Britain. That's where my head goes because I'm half British, probably the reason of that. You had political displacement of immigrants from Jamaica coming over to the UK, bringing with them the reggae music. The reggae music lent the foundation beat for, I'll say ska, but it was this foundation beat to that, which turned into the rapid, frenetic foundation that is typically associated with punk music, turned into, and also the political movement of saying, we're not going to follow your rules. Everybody, regardless of their gender, regardless of their ethnicity, whatever their sexual preferences and their orientation, if you're a weird, a freak, a kook, you belong with us. And they started to reclaim elements. They started to reclaim their, like the Doc Martens, they reclaimed those because they reclaimed them from the skinheads who were using them as a part of their uniform. They started to reclaim things that leather jackets and things that were considered to be a part of the rebellious people but they're highly educated. Everybody who was a part of it was highly educated, highly politically motivated, and they drove that into an art that was so profoundly impactful for generations.
Dexter Holland of The Offspring got his PhD in molecular biology at USC. Greg Ginn of Black Flag graduated from UCLA. The guy from Bad Religion got his master's in geology from UCLA, and he's working on his PhD in evolutionary biology at Cornell.
That was a hard shift. Goes dormant for a while, comes back as grunge music. It's a little bit more palatable now. We're like feeling it out. It's still a little, but it's a little bit more, it's like a little off there, but it's still pretty comfortable.
Well, the demand was there too, because you saw a lot of people, you know, going through this movement and banding together and then started moving into a subculture because they really believed in it around the world. It happened in the States. It happened throughout Europe. It's happening now still. We're having other punk revolutions now in other parts of the world that are happening in Iran and things like that. People are going through their own punk, you know, movement because like punk is for everybody in that context. It's not just music. It's a way of life.
It's rebellious.
And I think I would say that punk is still alive. It's within people rather than, you know, punk music and stuff like that. I think people are rebelling and people are looking at it and saying, I have an opinion or I have something I believe and putting that forward. And that's punk. Punk doesn't just have to be music. Punk is a way of life.
It's a way of life. I mean, you have people who are rebelling against society in Iraq. They have underground death metal. Biff mentioned death metal when she was talking about it. I think death metal might actually be the punk music that's happening right now. But in Iraq, you have people who are rebelling against curfews and they've got their underground death metal groups that people will go to, which I think is really interesting. There's an undercurrent that's happening there that's pushing away the politics, and the politicians that are in power are saying to them, you have to do these, you have to follow our rules. And they're like, we don't want to have a curfew. We don't want to not play our music. We're going to do it anyway. And we're going to figure out a way to do it. That's punk. Yeah. I feel like it's like we need shirts that just say that's punk.
Yeah. And I love even the DIY. Like the DIY culture really started, from what I know, in the punk movement. So people were doing DIY in the music side of it or in the business. They were cutting their teeth, traveling to different venues and sleeping in their cars. Biff talks about her going from place to place and really roughing it, you know, in the music scene, just trying to do performances. So that on its own, that DIY culture and how to market yourself, how to get people out to your shows, making your own clothes, you know, making your own buttons and getting this whole culture around is unbelievable. And so that DIY now, I think, and you and I don't really agree on this as much, I think that DIY, and every punk person who's really hardcore punk is going to hate me right now, but I think that corporate is going to help that next surgence. I know all the punks are like, boo, they're throwing like buttons at me, and
I don't know who was hissing you right now, but they just came in.
Right. We're like, who is that?
Who is that?
Like, is that Billy? That's Billy Idol. I'm like, oh my God. I wish. I know. But I would say that corporate is helping push that punk to the next level. The reason why I say this is because I believe that Spotify and outlets like that are for corporate are creating and giving leverage to artists and to people just like us, podcasts, to do and say and create change and giving us a platform to talk to millions of people. That to me is really punk, and they're helping to push that. And they may not be giving us a lot of money, obviously, but they're giving us a platform to push it through. So to me, that's corporate helping punk and helping people create change and create different ways of thinking. I love it, but who knows? And then obviously they're making money out of it. But Warped Tour did the same thing. Biff was on the Warped Tour, Sum 41. They were the first festival in music that was corporate to make this a mass appeal.
Punk style music is one thing.
Right.
Indie music is another thing. And then punk is a whole other thing. So I think you can have punk style music and make money off of it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's punk, but it still can have a message.
But why isn't it punk though? That's the question. Because then why would you call it punk rock music or punk pop music if it doesn't have an element of punk?
Because if you
isn't it just pop music?
If you want to step outside of the box at that point, and the powers that be, the ones that are signing your checks, don't agree with it, then sorry, man, you're
then it's
SOL.
Right. But now
Right?
I would say
you don't have true freedom. There's a freedom with being punk.
let's sum it up then. So saying punk in different contexts is you can have something like Spotify and corporate, lifting up people or artists or, all different forms of art that are going to be on Spotify. It's probably going to be more than podcasts and music in the future, I would say. So, but they're not having a say. They're just giving the platform to speak and have a level of free speech and saying, go ahead and make what you want, but we're not going to control your content. That's corporate and punk working together. So I would say, obviously that's what artists are doing now, and it's giving them the platform to say, you don't need to sign to a label. You don't need to do all these things. You can do it by yourself. And that's like DIY punk right there.
But you still got to get approved. One, you have to get approved. Somebody there still has to see whether or not your content is still worthy to be on it. All right. So that's one.
So it's only giving somewhat of freedom of speech then, you would say?
It's freedom of speech within the confines of your terms and services of which you agree to. So you can't have anything on it. Now, I'm going to put out this. I don't align with this. I don't agree with it. This is just the argument. If you go on there and you have music that is profoundly offensive, advocates, we'll say it's the neo-Nazis anthem for freedom, and they're putting it in there. It's filled with racist connotations. It's hurtful. I guarantee you that's going to get taken down pretty fast from Spotify. They don't have the right, because they have, Spotify has embedded their moral code on that. On the other hand, what I do think is punk, Reddit. Reddit is punk because you can have a subreddit about anything and everything, and they've gotten in trouble so many times before, even though they're owned by Condé Nast, and it took a lot of work for them to get agreement on it. But Reddit, you can have a subreddit about anything and everything, and it all has a place there. You might not be able to access it very easily. It might get suppressed from searches. And I mean, if it really crosses like pedophilia, nope. Sorry.
Well, I hope.
I hope.
Jeez. Yeah.
But there are subreddits that are racist. I hate to say it, but they're there because the ethos of Reddit is that this is the world we play in. This is the world, not our world. I, as the creator, Alexis Ohanian, who's also married to Serena Williams, I, as a creator, cannot make a distinction that what I think is morally right is what you should think is morally right. So I have a space in which you all can create and share in. That's punk. Doesn't matter what it is. Like, you don't have, and the sign up process is really easy. And I don't even think there really is a terms, and there's just some rules. There's Reddicate that you sign to. It's like 10 rules or so.
But then that's not punk either then.
Your Reddicate is basically this. Don't shill. You know what shilling is?
No.
So shilling is going and selling things. So you don't go and you don't join a subreddit to say, I have a podcast. Come and follow me. I have this new product. Go and buy it. You have to go in and you have to contribute to the community. So you can join a subreddit, but you can't sell your shit.
Interesting.
So another etiquette is you don't flame other users. So someone comes in and they say something, you don't penalize them for their opinion because it's different than yours.
Huh. But isn't that controlled though still?
It's a very punk controlled because they're not saying you can't do this, you're going to get kicked off, you're going to get banned. It's very unlikely you're going to get banned from Reddit.
Well, I don't really go on Reddit all the time. I know you're more on the Reddit side than I would be on
4chan. I have no, like, I will lurk 4chan. Been doing it since it started when I used to go there for anime stuff. It's not really like that anymore. The Tor network, which is Tor stands for the Onion Router. So the Onion Router is like, so there's levels of internet. So we have the World Wide Web.
Yeah.
Right?
Obviously. Yeah.
We access everything in the directory www.
Yep.
Some people access a different directory on this computer that is known as the internet, and it's the Tor. And there's different levels. They get murkier and darker and darker and darker and darker as you go. But Tor, someone will call it deep web. I would not call it deep web. You can only access it using a specific browser with a specific plugin. You have to know where to go. But at one point that was famous for people who were buying their drugs and their guns and their counterfeit purses from the Silk Road.
Oh God.
Yeah. Contract killer, whatever you want, you can get it there. But it was a rebellion. It was saying World Wide Web is far too corporate for me. So I'm going to create this whole other world.
Yeah.
Silk Road is insane. It's using what we have, which is going back to your DIY, using what we have access to right now and to create our own realities that are based upon the world that we want to see outside our front door.
Yeah. And I think you connect with groups too, that people are doing punk things or doing things in DIY or having a different way of looking at the world. They come together through the internet and stuff like that. Another great one that I would say, something that we see in art, would be Banksy. Banksy is 100% punk. And I would say as a street artist, and is really pushing things forward when it comes to making political comments and doing it in a very, very, well, I wouldn't say protest, but doing it in a really...
Totally a protest.
It is, but it's like a peaceful protest, right? And using it through art. And Banksy's one of those that I think that is pushing that through. Unfortunately, though, we're seeing that, the corporate machine is picking up on it. How much does Banksy play a role in this? I don't really know. I hope he doesn't.
That would be the art of it if he did.
Right. But he does make some comments. Like, for example, that one, was it last year? I think 2019, when he sold that painting and then it went for a couple $1 million and then he shredded it when they bought it. See, that right there, that's some punk right there.
It's like saying, your rules are stupid.
Yes.
Do you realize how much money you spent on this thing that is a print? And I can make hundreds of thousands of this one particular print. It has no value. The only value that's on this is the value that you have placed upon it. So I am telling you as the artist, it is completely worthless. And let me show you that right now. And you're like, oh my God, now it's worth $20 billion.
And he's saying my art, I'm making statements through art. I'm making all these comments about the way we're looking at society through my street art. It's not meant to be sold. It's meant to be looked at, consumed, and thought about. Mm-hmm. So I think that on that side, when we look at corporate trying to push it and having, all these art festivals, and they've been all over the world and, selling Banksy art or showing Banksy art, I as someone who works in PR, I would never PR anything like that because I just don't feel that that's something that I don't agree with.
That's really interesting though.
Yeah. But that also is my punk side saying, I agree with what he's doing in art and I believe in his statements that he's making. And I don't think it should be made money off of. If he's not making money, then other people shouldn't be making money. And because that's the artist, that's really their liberty if they want to sell it or not.
I would love to be Banksy and just be able to paint a painting and say, I'm going to get everything on this menu. Thank you very much. And can I have the most expensive bottle? And you're like, drink it. And then afterwards you just like produce and, payment. How about this like really priceless painting by Banksy?
Yes.
Like you could just do whatever it is you want. That is a whole other level of influence. And I love how he allegedly does not exploit it for financial gain that we're aware of. who knows? Maybe like this is one day we're going to get 10 years down the road and he's going to like pop out of Jack in the Box thing in the middle of Leicester Square and be like, surprise, I'm a bajillion. It's just like money. He pops out of this Jack in the Box thing, money just fluttering through the air from the velocity of him being shot out of it, and goes, surprise, I am rich because of you. I am Banksy. I reveal it. Now I'm just going to go like, and he's like crying, you know, drying the sweat off his brow with like all this money. He's like, all right, peace guys. I'm just going to, no more art for me. I'm just going to go and retire on an island in the middle of the Pacific.
I would be so sad. But then we'd notice 10 years later that Banksy would be like, that wasn't me. That was somebody else.
Yeah. You know, he's like, oh, you got us again, Banksy.
Yeah.
He is genius in that way. Some people are like, oh, he's so mainstream. Like, I'm not into him. I'm like into like Coons or something. You're just like, all right, cool. Like, you're cool. You're way cooler than I am. Great. You don't like Banksy. What the fuck is wrong with you? It's like saying Supreme is also really cool. They're cool.
Supreme, the fashion brand?
Yeah.
Oh.
They produce one of something.
Right. I never even thought about
Scarcity marketing.
That's smart. That is still, that's it. Well, the other one that really started pop culture too is Hot Topic. Hot Topic was... I know.
I love me some Hot Topic.
Hot Topic is great, but now we're going back to fashion. But Hot Topic, and this is some punk people would say that Hot Topic is not punk, but Hot Topic was the first store, I believe, that came out with punk clothes and sold punk stuff that looked like it was DIY'd. So when you were going to see your pop punk band or a punk band, you didn't have to make your shirt because maybe you were busy and were like, shit, I didn't get to make my Nirvana shirt. Fuck. And then you went to Hot Topic and picked one up.
When I first started getting punk, to have a Hot Topic, I would be like, what? A place that has like t-shirts and it's already made and I don't have to go to a show.
And so a lot of people would laugh and say that's consumerism, but it is, but it's also helping to push the punk agenda.
Well, I know the agenda, the aesthetic.
Right. But when I say agenda, I mean the overall culture of it, right? Everyone has obviously punks and different punks have different agendas of things that they want, but it all kind of had they're all going down the same road.
Right. Well, am I malfunctioning?
You got a 16-year-old kid that got his entire outfit from Hot Topic. Is telling you that you're not punk. There's something wrong there.
Don't go bashing punk when you're not wearing punk stuff yourself.
But you don't need.
It's like such a hypocrite.
You can bash whatever the fuck you want, wearing whatever the heck you want. Like, you don't need to be like, okay, well now I'm 110% punk, which means I can only wear certain labels. That goes back to that whole skater poser thing. It does not matter who you are and how you're driven and how you want to present it in the world. That's who you are.
Sure, but don't go make fun of people that are doing pop punk music.
So what do I wear then?
Well, but
what's the approved wear for when I'm making fun of somebody? Because I do that a lot. I want to make sure that I'm wearing the appropriate attire.
Well, yeah, but the whole point is don't go and make fun of somebody that's doing pop punk music and on Warped Tour and touring and telling them that they're not punk and that they're a sellout when they're wearing a sellout Hot Topic t-shirt.
Because maybe they're a sellout and they're just doing a sellout. Yo, shout out, man. You're a sellout. You're a sellout. Fuck you. Fuck you. Like,
I don't know. We
don't know. Because Billy didn't give them a chance. He just judged them for what they were wearing. You know what? You shouldn't shame somebody with what they're wearing on their bodies. You know what? Hot Topic is a fine brand. Hot Topic, I love as much as I love my Fashion Nova jeans.
Yeah, but it's just funny when you tell Sum 41 and that they're not punk, but then somebody's wearing a commercialized brand that's supposed to be punk.
Okay.
It's just the irony just kills me. I can't.
You brought up Sum 41 now, and I just have to say, can you really be punk if you're wearing a puka share necklace?
Well, honestly, I think there's. I know. I'm like, I look at punk.
Oh wait, no, that's not even punk. If I had a punk beat right now, I'd write a song for you called "Punk in a Puka Shell Necklace."
Punk in a puka shell necklace.
Yeah,
that's the name of our next podcast.
Punk in a puka shell necklace.
Yeah, say that 20 times.
That is also I'm just gonna have a bunch of random shirts that no one is gonna buy. One is gonna say that's punk. Another is gonna say punk in a puka shell necklace.
That's amazing.
But it feels good to say it. Try it.
We have one person buy it.
By what? What are they buying?
That's Marie.
What are they
Punk
buying?
and a puka necklace. Yeah. There we go.
It has like a good alliteration to it.
It does. It's nice.
So yes, finally. I just think that you can say whatever it is. You can have an opinion about whatever you want. It doesn't matter what you it should not, unless of course you're advocating for no slavery and you're wearing clothes that were made in a sweatshop. Like there's sometimes I think you're just like, okay, no, you're vegan and you're wearing leather shoes. Like little things you're just like,
Yeah. But I think now when we look at, this is where punk has maybe come now in the mainstream, is that we have these odes to it, to fashion and things like that. So people put nods to punk and they're saying, I believe in a punk lifestyle, but I'm not massively doing punk. I'm not a hardcore punk person.
Agreed.
So I think we're seeing that more, which is maybe a nice little medium that we found in a common road, instead of being like super angry, and then super pop and them having on either sides. Maybe punk has just come together now as one, it's like a Buddha moment. It's taken the middle lane, and it's now become one. It's just because it's been totally integrated.
Yeah, why
and
not?
so maybe that's why we're mainstream. It's maybe why we don't see punk right now, because it's been so integrated in everything we do.
And I think we also have the gluttony to believe that we have much more freedom in our day-to-day lives, when truthfully, I would say arguably, we're tethered to more things that mean that we don't have as much freedom.
Do we give thanks to the internet for helping punk become more mainstream too?
I think, well, the internet always deserves a nod, in my opinion. Internet with a capital I.
You're online.
You're online. Hi. Welcome to the internet. Right. You're online. Yeah. What do you have to say to our host today, internet? Just want to say thanks so much for all of your support over these years. It's been a really hard road.
Right.
It's just like this. Like, I used to just be a part of the internet over in the United States of America over there. But, since I've just been so blessed that everyone around the world has just really come to like embrace me as a part and just welcome me in their homes, to allow me access to their FaceTime cameras, to give me all of their passwords, to all of their banking information, everything. I do my best not to abuse that, but there's a few bad seeds that kind of get into the mix, and we're working really hard to make it a much more secure experience for everybody. So glad we don't have to worry about the modems. Modems were assholes, let me tell you. Boo-wee.
That's dialogue. But overall, I think punk culture has really become something that is embraced and loved, and I'm happy that we had a chance to talk to Biff.
Yeah.
And talk to her about her. I know, she really is lovely. And to talk about her whole life and how she's had all these different experiences, and then what her experience through punk culture was, along with then her internal punkness that she's gone through, and all these other moments that she's gone through that have just been.
Her drive.
Yeah. It's really, really lovely. Yeah.
Just her drive and her will to achieve in the face of no matter what adversity, and to be able to look at that and say, okay, well, that's what's so. What do I want to do with it? I can sit and wallow about how I'm ill and live in that space, or I can look at the anger that I had with my boyfriend, where I'm running through that field and like harbor that forever and never forgive. Or I can channel all of these feelings into something really powerful that will help impact others. Like, she's just, how she's able to transform negative into positive things that feed others in a positive light was, that was like the transformative part of the conversation. Dare I say punk?
It's very punk. Yes. So with that said, I would say check out Biff Naked's new single Jim as well. That's out right now. And the music video as well is online. Mm-hmm. So thank you, Biff.
Thank you, Biff.
Yeah. Until another episode of Alt.Pop.Repeat. And do follow us on Instagram at Alt.Pop.Repeat. Well, we do have to plug it.
You can find us on all major platforms at Alt.Pop.Repeat. No spaces, no dots, unless, of course, you're writing it in a press release. Then, of course, put the dots between the alt, the pop, and the repeat. Otherwise, all one word. You can find us on everything: SoundCloud, Google Podcasts, iTunes,
and Alt.Pop.Repeat.com.
Spotify.
That's our plug.
Bye now.
Bye.
You never loved me,